really allows me, that lens allows me to ethereal effect to my images. It also allows me to reach far into the garden. So if I'm shooting at let's say the Skagit Valley, the tulips, and I can't walk into the beds, I can reach far in, or Swan Island dahlias, for example. Or if I'm walking on a trail, I don't like to step off the trail. So this gives me that ability to also reach out. I can shoot a flower like this and a hummingbird with the same lens in the same garden. And I love the ability to do that without having to change lenses. I also have a whole assembly of lens babies. The favorites, if you were to ask me which ones were my favorites for flowers, I would say are the double glass 2, the Sweet 50, and the Velvet 85. But they all have their place and they're all fun. If you have a full frame camera, you are going to get the full effect from edge to edge. If you don't, you are probably not going to get the same effect around the perimeter of the image as a full frame would. Therefore, if I had a crop sensor, I would probably go with the Sweet 35 and the double glass 2 and a Velvet 56. So those would be my favorites. If you're going to shoot flowers with a lens baby, you need to be up close because the focal length is fairly wide, 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, 60 millimeters on a full frame. It's going to be too wide and your minimum focusing distance is going to be too far. You need to get up close to fill your frame. And in order to do that, you need to add a macro filter or macro converter or an extension tube. And there's pros and cons to each of them. But just know that if you have a lens baby and you're frustrated because you can't get your flowers in focus, you can't get close enough, this is usually why. So let me just touch on a couple of things that I find really important. And of this list, I'm going to talk about backgrounds and lighting. But to create images that I believe have a wow factor, I think you have to start with an interesting subject. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be the most beautiful flower in the garden. It could be a bud, it could be a past prime flower. You need to have compelling composition. And that requires that you understand the conventions of composition, but that doesn't require that you follow them. You need to know when you could or should break them. Clean or complementary backgrounds are so important. That's why I just want to touch on that. Effective lighting is also critical. You can have technical proficiency and be a skillful editor, but unless you have that little bit of magic, it's really not going to take the image into the next dimension. So here's an example of what I'm talking about with regard to backgrounds. When I was shooting this, I was doing a project one summer for the woman who founded or co-founded the Alaska Botanical Garden, and I was shooting her garden and several others that she was growing, and so she had a lot of plants that were almost one or two of a kind, not like a botanical garden where you might have a big bed of a lot of different irises. So I didn't have I couldn't say, well, that one's not so good, I'm going to do this one or that one or get this clump of them. I had sometimes one or two specimens or subjects to shoot. And I wanted them to look artistic because the title of the talk for the Pacific Northwest Flower and Garden Show was Every Gardener Grows a Masterpiece. So walking up to this iris on the left and photographing it yielded a not so beautiful photograph because I had a sidewalk in the background. I had some blown out areas and I had some deep shadows. So my dynamic range was too extreme and too many distractions. And I had some past prime flowers that weren't past prime in a beautiful way. So by bending down a little bit lower, I and using my, feet to maybe move me in a right or left direction, I can eliminate the background, the sidewalk, and the bright areas. But now I have a problem still with the dead flower behind there. And it's now even worse because it's merging with my subject. So I finally figured out now how to eliminate that in the image all the way on the right. But now I have that orange blob and it wasn't very appealing to me. So I decided that I would go in and come it to a close up. And when you do that, nobody can look at this and say, oh, she lopped off a petal, or just like with birds, a wing. Make sure that the viewer knows it was intentional by coming in more than one location. And how do you get a nice clean background when you're dealing with something like this? So it's not easy. You get to flow like a cat, and you need to be at eye level with the flowers. And I use gear ties. They are pliable, bendable wire with a rubber on them. You can get them on Amazon, and they make nice stocking stuffers. You can use them for everything. I just make an S shape out of them and pull back the stems that are offending me that I want out. Doesn't hurt any plants, and you just have to remember to take it out of the garden. Um, they make great ties to wrap around wires and cords and hair, and the heavy duty ones are great for putting around a tripod or bags. So I absolutely love gear ties. When I did, I always do this, I will do some self-analysis, look at the image and ascertain whether it's as good as you want it to be. And I really didn't want that additional stem in front of my flower. So I removed it with my gear tie, came in closer, and that was my final image. So let's talk about lighting. Lighting in the flower world has, benefits in terms of that you can shoot throughout the day, more so than you can if you're doing landscapes, because you can't really diffuse a mountain. And if you're going to shoot an eclipse, you have no control over whether or not the sky is all cloudy. But if you're doing flowers, you can go early and you can go late in the day. And that will almost always guarantee that your lighting is going to be beautiful and will give you a nice soft glow around your flowers. And once you get up a little bit into the daylight hours, if the sun is harsh, you can use a diffuser. So that's what Martin is holding. So that's an awfully large diffuser. I don't use diffusers that large. But anymore, I typically will try and find a flower in the shade. So you want to diffuse both your subject and the background as well. And then if you don't have enough light, maybe you're shooting in an environment where the light is just too dim and you need a little bit of pop, you can bring some handheld devices with you. And here's some example. This is a little fern. I was living in Alaska for many years, and you have a lot of time, many hours in the evening to shoot, which is really nice. But the light can be so dim that maybe you need to add a little pop of light. And that's what I did with just a little handheld light. You can't really use this to your benefit in broad daylight if you're under a shady area, because the ambient light is just too much. But once you get to the time of day where the light is just falling off, you can add a nice little bit of light. And I love this because it's easy to meter. What you see is what you get. There's no guessing, no speed light calculations or estimations or anything. And then you can use light creatively. This is also at that the lady's house. I was doing some lilacs, and I thought I want to do some abstract, make it a little bit different. I put the white lilacs in a blue vase and I set some of the lavender colored ones on the wrought iron chair and then put a little Lumi Muse with the orange gel, the CTO gel on it. Still a very small light, just to give it a little bit of illumination from behind. I shot down, which you can see the setup is in the left image. My vantage point is in the center image, pointing down. And then I started to open up my aperture. And I mentioned, I was going for the abstract look. And this is what I was trying to achieve. So how do you use light in the field to your benefit? I'll give you some examples. The image of the tulip that's shot in Skagit. I've been there a number of times and I kind of know where the sun's going to set. And I know from shooting there over and over that the tulips look entirely different. The colors look different at that time of day than they do earlier in the day. And it's proven time and time again to be the case. So I'm shooting into the light in the image on the left. In the center image, that's an abutilon flower. And what I did on that one was I held a little Lumimuse underneath it to light it up from below. And on the right, this is in Alaska in a bed. I had my camera on a manual exposure and underexposed it. So I'm shooting into the sun and I enhanced the backlighting on the stem and the leaves, just add some rim lighting by putting a little handheld flashlight behind the flower and angled it up at the stem. But the flowers themselves were dark. So, and I had no more light. So I used my iPhone. I put the iPhone in the bed with the light on, shining straight up. Okay, what do you do when you encounter a situation like this? Hard backgrounds, hard to isolate, very harsh light. So then you've got to pull all these things together. Where are you going to stand so that your background is clean? Well, you're certainly not going to face the bush. And this is a problem with a lot of plants. Camellias, which is this plant right here, are like that. Peonies are like this. A lot of roses are like this. You're facing the bush. You have no isolation. Your background is going to be a bunch of dark leaves and other flowers. And on occasion, if the sun is out and it's harsh, a lot of specular highlights. So I stand off to the right and shoot sideways. So you skim your plant. And that's what you can achieve without editing, without changing the background. So from this point, I would work a little bit on the background, but this is what you can achieve if you just use a little bit of diffusion, a little bit of isolation. Maybe you pull the other flowers away with a gear tie and you stand and facing a direction so that your background is far from your subject. Okay, and a shoot through. This is the breakdown of a shoot through. This is at the Bellevue Botanical Garden, and I've been there many times, but it was extremely hot and very dry, and that's becoming more the norm everywhere I go, unfortunately. So what I did was I chose these orange firework flowers as my subject, and the branches in the background, which looked very parched and quite past prime, were my background, almost straw in color. And then the leaves in the front, I got very close to, like touching my lens, and they look like little flames of fire. But this is what it looks like when you actually shoot them with a wide open or almost wide open aperture. Also at the Bellevue Botanical Garden, these little snowdrops, which I love. I also bring a kneeling pad with me almost everywhere I go. They allow me to put my things down on the ground without getting dirty. If I change lenses, for example, I can sit on it, I can kneel on it. I like that better than kneeling pads because I have a bad knee. I like to sit instead of getting on my knee. And also just really nice, clean platform to change lenses and lay things out. So I got down low so that I could shoot straight at these snowdrops. And as you can see, it's a pretty bright day. So I shot into the flowers and through using those yellow and orange tulips as a background. Okay, so if you look at this, you'll see what the effect was from those tulips. Okay, I'm going to share some images with you so that you can see how important boredom can be. And it was really truly valuable for me to go through the pandemic and be teaching online. I had to come up with a variety of ways to teach different techniques with using the same subject because I couldn't get out to gardens. I was online and I could go to the grocery store and buy tulips and calla lilies. Those are primarily the flowers that I was able to easily get. So here is an example of one of the tulips. I bought a potted plant. It had red tulips that were very, very deep red, like a crimson color, and also very thick, shiny petals, which was unusual. Big flowers, and the petals reflected light in a way that didn't seem very attractive to me. So I tried shooting it every which way with all of the different lenses on a light pad against a black background in my backyard, everything you can imagine. In this case, I'm shooting it in my dining room. I'm using a lens baby and I'm shooting towards a large window that has blinds on it that are almost somewhat translucent. Okay, so my goal is to blow out that whole background and make it white. I liked this effect, and I had my lens baby very wide open. Okay, sometimes when I do that, I can't even get the center much in focus, and if that's the case, I'll shoot multiple images at various apertures, and then I can combine one with one that's very wide open to give you that effect. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to see if I could change this and make it look very light, like a watercolor painting. And so I did with a texture. This is in post-processing. So it's a little shocking to the eyes to go from this to this, but I really enjoyed that process. And another example of a calla lily that was shot on a light pad. I also shot this with all different lenses, trying to figure out what could I do to make this interesting, unique. And it really wasn't something that I could achieve by using a different lens. I just ended up using this image. I then took it in and edited it in Lightroom and Photoshop by first doing a black and white conversion and then applying some color grading and then going into Photoshop. And I'll show you the result. Okay, so talking about boredom, I finally was able to get out in the field, and it was also a very hot year. So I kept running into these echinacea or coneflowers everywhere from Denver to Maryland. It was in every garden, and I was convinced these had to be some of the most resilient flowers ever. So let me show you how I tried to make them appear differently. This one is quite bold. The flowers behind it were very bright, and I used a lens baby with a creative aperture disc in it. It looks like a starburst pattern. You can see it in the bokeh behind the flowers in the background. Okay, so you'll see that again here. This is a slightly different pattern, but it's also achieved by putting a creative aperture disc into one of the lens babies. This is shot in Maine. So I decided, okay, well, how can I make them look different? I'll shoot them from underneath. So I wanted I wanted the viewer to give you the feeling that this is what the flowers see looking up into the trees. And then I switched to my 100mm, and those very same flowers became like this, more like a bright graphic design against a black and white polka dotted background. Same exact location as this. I got this by simply using a different lens. So this is not an editing, post-processing technique. And then a different lens in yet another area. I wanted to show the community. So I'm back to a lens baby, and I focused on the flower. And then I switched to one of the vintage lens babies that has a very steep fall off in focus to give you a very soft effect. So if you remember, the very first one I showed had a very bold effect, as well as the pink graphic one with the black and white dots. And now you have a very soft effect of the flowers that are very hard. You know, if you know cone flowers, these orange centers, the little spikes in the center, are very stiff, very, very pokey. And again, something that I don't hardly ever do, which is shooting down on flowers in a garden bed. I'll do it on a light pad, but I typically don't do that in a garden. Why? Because the background is too in focus and it detracts. But when you have one of the lenses that gives you a real dramatic fall off in focus, it's great. And yet another optic, a lens baby with a different disc in. And this is in a garden at a residential location. So it's more like a painting. So in this one, I'm not worried about getting a lot of things in focus. I barely have anything in focus, but I love it. And then a shoot through. This is shooting through the petals of a large bloom down to one that's maybe a young teenager. And then in someone's garden, post-processing with a texture. And in that same garden, looking up into the sky and the trees and adding a texture onto that. So that was a variety of images, all the same type of flower. So techniques that I employ, and I'll show you some examples of these. And I've already shown you some, but I'm going to go through them more methodically with different types of flowers. Selective focus, abstracts, using various lenses and optics, still life, creating things maybe inside your home, high and low key, light painting, multiple exposures, shooting through, and then of course post-processing. So let me take you on a journey through a garden. I like to talk about first shooting what it feels like without overthinking anything, but I have to say these aren't the easiest images to create. It's why? Because you really do want to get all that beauty in the image, but it's got to be in a way that makes sense aesthetically. And I don't know how to describe it, but you know when you feel it. So in this case, I'm very low, like laying down, looking up, and I wanted that main flower, the tulip, to look like it's just a bowl of light, and all of the others are just supporting actors in the garden. Selective focus allows you to really convey to the viewer what you're trying to tell them. What is your storyline? And in this case, it's a relationship between the two leaves with a little drop of water. And that might be a tear. It could be just through the looking glass. It's whatever the viewer likes to believe it is. And that's what I like about photography, is not telling the viewer what it means to me, but I feel like it's a success when the viewer feels something in their eyes, take them on a journey through their mind and the body into their memories and into their dreams, and they see things and feel things that you couldn't even possibly imagine. An abstract with a lens baby. I was in the Adirondacks a couple of years ago, and there were a lot of beautiful fern, and the colors were just so pretty, but I couldn't really capture them. Every time I tried to get a picture of a fern, it was a picture of a fern, and it was stiff and it looked like a fern. I didn't really want that. I wanted the feeling. And so I did these not knowing, well, is this, it felt good in the camera, but will it work once you get back to your computer? Sometimes I never know, but I really did enjoy it. This is actually in Victoria, British Columbia, at Government House, and also with a lens baby, focus, very shallow. So when I'm in a situation like that, I have to ask myself, well, where do I want to place the focus? Do I want it on the spine of the top or the closest fern? Do I want it on the tip of that fern? I don't know. So maybe I will shoot it at different locations and then decide when I get back to the computer and I look at the image. Because for me, it's about the relationship between the two fern fronds. To put the focus on the tip of one really would basically, I think, hijack the whole story and the relationship. So I ended up choosing the image where I had the focus on the topmost part of the spine, the center piece of the stem on the top frond. Also at Government House, past prime tulips and a curved leaf. I mean, how interesting and random can that be? But it can be so beautiful and so simple and serene. And sometimes when you feel like everything is right, and I can remember sitting there at this group of Columbine thinking to myself, oh, hallelujah, everything seems normal for once. We were surrounded by fires, there was smoke everywhere, and a lot of things were dry and dead. And we got to this area and it was wonderful. And I just sat down and I enjoyed it. I didn't try overthinking it. Shooting through using different lenses. And I believe with this one, I used Helios lens with a lot of front element. So here are some images that I did at Madeline Island, teach in Wisconsin here. There's four of us teaching: Mike Motes, Kathleen Clemens, myself, and Andrea Gulix. And the last time I was there, they're known for their lupin. I decided I was going to go to one lupin field, one little area, and put on as many different lenses as I could just to illustrate the way you can get different looks just by changing lenses. And what I would draw your attention to is in the upper left and center, you look at the background and you'll see the pattern in the background in the trees. In the upper left, it's little dots. In the upper center, it's like a crisscross pattern. Come down to the center bottom. Upper level glass too, and they in the upper right on the left are ones that and the right is 85 with a Raynox, a little clip-on attachment. Okay. And that's just zooming way in close. You've got to be so close to your subject to get that effectively. And then you can play with Omni filters. These are the colored ones. This is done indoors on the, I've got a science board, a trifold science board with a shirt with flowing leaves on it. Not leaves, I'm sorry, sleeves behind it. And then I've just put colored wands around it. Another image with the Helios and still life, setting everything up. And so for something like this, I would probably, I can't get too far back, so I can't use my 100 mm. I'm probably going to use either the Velvet 85, Velvet 56, or a 24-70. How about high key? You can do this indoors or you can do it outdoors. And don't forget about negative space and how you can bring that flower in and play with that negative space. More negative space. And what can you do with that? You can let it breathe and just be a nice area for the flower or the bloom to just breathe into. Or you can use it if you want to for a card. You can put some text on it. Low key. This was a conversion. I had an orange, bright orange ranunculus. I decided to do the black and white conversion and see if in Lightroom I could colorize the vase, which I did. So all the colors in the vase are introduced in Lightroom. High key and low key in the field, shooting up towards a cloudy sky in the left, and then just towards a dark tree, and then darkening it down in post-processing on the right. Light painting, and I do this in a dark room. Still life. So this gives you some context. This is a still life that I created of a variety of flowers. And then in the upper right, I'm doing a close-up of just one. And in the lower right, I've done a multiple of just with the dahlia in the center of my multiple and all the others swirling around it. And on the subject of multiple images, this is a rose in the garden and a dahlia cut against a blackboard, multiple image with texture added. Dancing flowers. I have an online academy of classes, and this was a technique that Paulina Plotnikova taught us. It's hard. It doesn't look as hard as it is, but it was a lot of fun. And then I'm such a big fan of shoot throughs. So there's different things you can shoot through in the field, or you can create something. In this case, this was at Gibbs Gardens, north of Atlanta. I'm standing up next to a tree. The tree trunk splits, had different branches, big, thick trunks. And if I got up close to it, I could find like a little opening. And through that opening, I can focus on the water lily floating in the pond in the distance. A shoot through of a tree, full of blooms. So I just get close up to some of them and focus on the flower beyond, and then the plants in the distance give me the background. So it's essentially a sandwich, a foreground, a subject, and a background. And in this case, it's the same. I just a little bit of my lupin showing through. And looking towards an echinacea, shooting through some rudbeckias up into the trees. And I even thought, why not a shoot through at the cypress swamps? I could do that. I could get up close to some of these beautiful rust colored needles and try that technique and just make it look entirely different. This is at Butchart Gardens. And I love how they plant in one area in the Japanese garden, the Himalayan blue poppies alongside some salmon and peachy colored rhododendrons. It's a really beautiful combination. This is on the other side of Canada. I shoot through in a wild area. And then I added a texture. But to achieve this, I had to get pretty low on the ground and use a long lens to get into my subject. And then back at Gibbs Gardens in the fall, when the leaves start to turn color, they make beautiful reflections in the pond. And so I like to shoot the reflections and then flip them right side up. Intentional camera movement. So this is a field of autumn leaves on trees. And this is done in post-processing. This is at the Denver Botanic Garden. Just isolating my subject and the bud, but doing a motion blur on the rest of the image. And here's a couple of other examples of that. This is at Madeline Island. I could not do a motion blur in the field, an intentional camera movement with the camera and the lens. It just wouldn't work because there's too much green up above it. It works really nicely when you have a lot of tree trunks, but it just smudged, it smeared. So what I did was I took this into Photoshop and I did a digital ICM, or intentional camera movement is what people call it, but I call it digital. And I wanted to retain the tree trunks, because if you smear them, all the branches on the tree, that main tree going out horizontally would not have done well with a vertical movement. Okay. And now this was just in September. I taught in the Adirondacks and it was very dry, like bone dry. We searched and searched before we could find this beautiful area of cinnamon fern, but it just didn't look at all like it did the year before. And in fact, there's a lot of fires up in New York, or are fires. I don't know about a lot, but it's just so dry. So I did this photograph, and we tried doing some intentional camera movement in the field, and that was all well and fine. But you see, the problem here is there's just so many branches going this way and that. So what I did was I did take this in and clean it up online in Photoshop, and then I did a blur. But I wanted to keep some of the fern in focus. So it's kind of the opposite of what I did with the lupin. And I intentionally left that branch up in the upper left visible and clear, just as a little footnote. And then I played with the blend modes and the color balance. I felt like it looked a little bit more mystical and surreal this way. And since I was already off into my long exposure, we were to do a couple of workshops here, unfortunately at the end of October, beginning of November, but Hurricane Helene had us in mind and we're not able to go. So a year ago I was there and it was a little bit breezy, so all the little needles that had fallen off the tree on the water made a really nice swirling pattern on the water on long exposure. And Photoshop, you can do, this was summertime, everything was green, but I did some Photoshop adjustments to it because I wanted it to look more like winter. In this case, I used a pretty dead dogwood, replaced the little green ball at the top, which is really the flowers. The bracts are the white things that look like petals. I replicated some of those, used some tools in Photoshop to make it look like it was billowing, more like a flowing veil. And then here's some examples of adding textures, shooting multiple images. And I really like to shoot my textures in the same area, same garden, same fields as my subject when at all possible. And so I'm always shooting, looking for textures to shoot. Okay. This is a combination of a very close up of a forget-me-not and an abstract. This is shooting during bright sun, and it works on this particular flower because it's flat, right? And it worked just fine. I didn't have issues with shadows. Background was fine, but I decided to spice it up and some a texture to the background. I think I added 2 textures to it. This is one texture added to this flower. And this is a flower in a vase, same vase you saw earlier with the ranunculus. But I set a whole bunch of garlands for Christmas, you know, the Christmas garlands around the vase, but I couldn't get this effect with one shot. So I had to put some more attachments on my lens. This was all done with Lens Baby, and shoot them from different distances and then combine them in post-processing. And here's some things, you know, that you can do just for fun. I like to do things like this to teach myself and become more familiar with the different tools so that when I want to use them in more nuanced ways, I'm very familiar with them. So in this case, I'm using selective focus to change colors of things. Like the yellow flowers became blue. The background is achieved with the pink and the blue down in the bottom center by using an inverted radial filter and then a radial filter for the pink, and then the 2 linear filters to give me the green and the yellow, and coral colored petals, and then all the way on the right a black and white conversion, but adding color to the back into the centers. So I really feel like post-processing can be your best friend. And I try to take good pictures in the field, but sometimes you don't always have that option. So let's say, for example, you go and there's only one lotus bud that you can photograph that's within your range distance wise, but the sun is starting to come out and it's ruining the background. See what it's doing to the big leaf in the background, the pad, the lotus pad. So yeah, that's a problem. And the other issue I'm seeing is the stem back, and I don't like that stem. So here's I'm looking at this from a critical perspective. My flower is too dull. The sun is too bright. I don't really love the composition. What do I do? Change the composition. I moderate and balance out the light. I remove the stem and I brighten the flower. And that's all done in Lightroom. This is an example of what I would do in Photoshop, and just for fun. I don't always do this. I've shown you a lot of examples of flowers where I've shot them. They might be just fine as they are. They might be a shoot through. They might be high key or low key with no adjustments afterwards other than just minor, vibrant saturations, shadows, and denoise. But then sometimes I do like to go and really play with things in post-processing. So I'm showing you a broad range of possibilities. So when I know I've got a beautiful arrangement here of these roses, at this moment when I'm shooting it, I really have no idea what I'm going to do with it, how I'm going to edit it. But I do know that I want a good background. And I want to eliminate that interface. Do you see where the green grass is versus the mulch? I really tried to get a uniform background behind my clusters. It's problematic when you especially when there's a variance of light, hard line, for example. So I added it and a gradient layer in Photoshop. But then sometimes you cannot get a clean background. You just can't. Well, in most cases, I'm going to just skip over those situations. But every now and then, I'll see a beautiful flower, an orchid, an iris, or whatever. And I'm like, that's so pretty. I don't think I've seen anything like it anywhere else. The light is good. The flower is great. Look at the bud. The bud looks nice. The main flower looks good. The secondary flower looks good. I'm going to take the photo and let's see what we can do. What do I have to do to this? Is I have to remove the flower in the lower left. I have to remove the flower in the background in the very top, and all those other leaves. It's not good. So took some work. This is my final image. This is not what I usually like to do, but it can be done. And then for fun, this is it's kind of a montage. This is Potter Marsh in Anchorage, Alaska, and it's an intentional camera movement, a vertical swipe of the reeds growing in the marsh down in the water, and a photograph up of the leaves in a tree. So it's looking down towards the water and looking up, and then I've combined them and at various blend modes. I included the leaves twice. The reeds, I can't remember if I put them in once or twice, but suffice to say, it's all in the same little area in Potter Marsh. So it's an abstract view. Another abstract similar to the tulips I showed you earlier. This is a shoot through with a texture. And then just having fun with a lot of leaves when things are so messy. But I have to say, this was last year. This year, I had such a hard time everywhere I went with blemishes and dead leaves that weren't supposed to be dead yet, just because of the drought conditions and the high temperatures. But I like doing this when you're, having fun with fall and fall colors. And when you are supposed to have fall colors and they're not, you can still shoot leaves and then play with different blend modes in Photoshop and just do whatever, suits your fancy. This was in the Adirondacks last year, and the image as shot is in the upper left. And then the other two are just the same exact image, but layered in different blend modes in Photoshop. This will walk you through that image of, well, not the same image, but the same flower of the lotus that I shot in Denver, the one that had the water feature behind it. So this is getting lower. You can't see the water feature now. You can only see trees way in the distance. And the image as shot is on the left. The intermediate phase of processing, post-processing, is on the lower right. You can see I'm coming in, I've cropped in, I've added a little bit of a grunge texture, but then I decided to add a radial filter and create a circle or a moon behind the lotus. And then I put on another radial filter, inverted it, reduced the clarity, and added haze around the outer edge, lightened it up quite a bit, and then went back into Photoshop and added another texture so that it didn't look like a round ball of light. I wanted it to have some texture to it. So it went from here to here. And this is in Chicago at the Chicago Botanical Garden. It's a multiple, and I believe it is a multiple of 3, but I could be wrong. I've rotated it, and then I've edited it on the right. This is my edited version, minimizing the you can see that there's three leaves, right? It's one leaf replicated 2 more times, but I didn't want the center of the leaf to show. So I made sure that I edited that center out. I revealed the center of the lotus. You save my source images. So you have to have a camera that allows you to save your source images. And then I revealed that in the center of the lotus. Okay. When I was at that point, I wasn't happy, wasn't really where I wanted to head with it. So I continued on, came back to it later, and introduced some small, tiny aquatic plants to it. And that was my result. And then I think this is my last example of bringing things together. This is at Sissinghurst Castle in the UK, outside of London. We were climbing up the stairs in the tower, and this is Vita Sackville West's writing room. And I stopped for a moment. I didn't have enough time to really think it through, but I was just so enamored with the fact that all of her things were still there. The light was on. So I took a couple of images, very high ISO. I shot with the focus in this one on the wrought iron gate door to the writing room. And then on the other image, I shot focusing in on the light inside. I ended up using this and blending it with this image to create this. And I absolutely loved that I left and read some books about Vita Sackville West and her husband Harold, and it was fascinating, very, very interesting story about them. And I believe that her grandson or nephew referred to her or the garden as Vita's floating heart. And I had no clue that when I was taking this, that on that wrought iron gate or door, there were hearts. So that just gave me goosebumps. I really feel that photography is so much more than just a snapshot. It's artistic, it can be aesthetically pleasing, and most of all, I think it should have some meaning. So tap into the magic in you, try some of these techniques. And here's my contact information.
Jackie, thanks so much. Do you want to just say a little bit about the various workshops and courses that you have?
Yes, absolutely. I can do that. I'll show you just a quick website link, and then you'll know where to go. If you can bear with me for a second, I'll pull it up.
And you'll need to share your screen again when you get there.
Okay, so 1 second. Okay, this is my website, Jackie Kramer Fine Art. And if you go to workshops, it's a little bit slow. I'm sorry, I'm in a hotel room right now. And there we go. All right, here we go, coming. You can see what I have coming up. I do a lot of birds. So next year, I'm going to be doing some of these I need to put up on here that they are filled. I've got openings in Naples in March, flowers, Costa Rica's full, Florida birds and beach. I might be able to take one more person. That's in St. Augustine. And then I'm doing Tanzania. And we have openings for that. And that's in May. Brazil, I'm full. But if anybody is interested in that, I did open up a brand new 2026 version. And then Madeline Island, we're full for next summer, but they just opened up 2020. Oh, I need to change the date. My apologies, 2026. And then we're going to be doing Ecuador next November. And that's also birds. Galapagos is an optional extension, but I'm not sure that we are going to continue or keep the Galapagos. I think we're probably just going to do Ecuador. So and just so that you can see like my birds, it's a whole different thing, but it's my photos are very similar. I use a lot of the same techniques, shooting through selective focus backgrounds, interesting backgrounds, very little post-processing. But when I say very little, yes, there is post-processing, but I mean very little in terms of the backgrounds, but I do that as well. So this is a little insight into my other world. And then our online classes, I'm just assembling our teachers for next year. And this is, let's see if I can go to this year. This year is Florography Online 2024. And the regular price was $379, and we'll run a special around the Thanksgiving or whenever I come up with it. So here you can see my instructors are also from all over the place. We've got so many great people that are very, very well versed in what they do. And so I think we had almost 20 people. They spread out here. And these are the different techniques that we did this year. Night photography, panoramics, lens babies, creative post-processing, and we'll be starting that again. And the way this is run is it's called Florography Online, but it is not just flowers. As you can see, we're doing landscapes and night photography and panorama, food, so all kinds of different things. We have teachers who are from all over the world and students from all over the world. And the instructors do a class, roll up your sleeves type of class, and then they give an assignment to the students who then, it's optional, turn in the result. And then a week later, the instructor comes back and offers feedback on the images that were submitted. So if you're at all interested in that, I'll put the website. Oops, let me see. Let me go back here. I don't have next year's up yet, but here is the link to that.
And I will, and I can post the link to your website on our Facebook page later.
Oh, thank you very much.
No, your work is always so creative and really so nicely done.
Oh, thank you.
Would you,
Thank you very much.
do you have time to take a few questions if we have any questions?
Would love to.
Okay.
I don't. I have a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, Johanna.
I heard you saying applying textures all along, and then at some point it sounds like you create your own textures with a different shot. Can you talk just a little about that?
Yes. So I've got a class, an online class that I've done where I walk people through that, but you can do it with, usually it's helpful if you have a macro lens. Okay. What do you shoot, flowers? Do you have a macro lens?
I have a Velvet 56 that I just got
56?
recently.
Okay.
You can really get close with that thing.
Okay. So I shoot textures with, you can use that. You can use a long lens, but you need to go out of focus and you're looking for light, color, shapes. And I just constantly keep them coming. So I don't have to look far. I like as I said earlier, it's kind of like the DNA is all similar because they're coming from the same location. Same thing with my birds. I do the same thing with birds. And I have a whole series of birds with different backgrounds. But with my birds, I usually don't like them. I don't usually go so crazy. Okay. But I do on occasion do that. And I've been asked to talk more about applying backgrounds to birds. So I'm trying to do more just so I have some material to talk about. But yeah, I like to go out of focus, open and wide. If it looks too blurry, I don't want to do something that I can create in Photoshop. So let me start by saying that if I can create a gradient, a solid color or a gradient of color in Photoshop, there's no point in me doing it in the field. To me, that's not what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to bring in light and interesting things. So it could be a color wash, it could be bark, it could be coral, it could be tile, it could be an old cookie sheet, it could be something really beautiful and colorful, a combination of colors. Let me see. And then you just have to experiment and apply it to your images.
In Photoshop.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of birds. I've never even thought about textured backgrounds for birds, but they look great, those few that you showed.
Oh, I don't think I showed you any. Did I show you any with backgrounds?
There were, I think there were a couple in the on the web page.
I will show you. If you give me a minute, I'll show you. I'll show you some. Hold on one second. You'll see what I mean when I show you. One second. Got to get back to you. Okay, this is a partial presentation. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. This one in the center has a texture on it. Okay. I'm taking you all the way down to some examples. Okay. This is just lighting. Now I'm going to show you this. This is a creative texture. This is sort of akin to a bad photo of my flower. How can I make it good or maybe even great? So I'll crop it. I'll brighten the bird just like I did the lotus and add a texture. And then here are 3 images with textures. Okay, so can you see the difference between this? Like I said, I don't go crazy. And none of these have textures. All of these have textures.
I see that now.
This has textures. This has a lot of textures. Okay. So when you see the difference, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Gorgeous.
Thank you, guys.
Other questions for Jackie?
Well, thank you. And Doran, thank you for joining.
Jackie and Bob, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate being able to join your meeting and be a part of your group tonight, and really glad we could put this together. So thank you all for that.
Mhm.
Oh, it was wonderful to have you all join us.
We have really enjoyed this. Jackie, that was amazing.
Oh, thank you
Beautiful,
so
beautiful
very much.
images, really interesting, very inspiring. So thank you.
And I think everybody appreciated the images from Bouchard Gardens.
Oh.
We did for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a lot up in that area, and I realized as I was kind of about maybe a third or halfway through, I should have been telling you that earlier on. I love Bouchard, Government House, Finnerty, Abkhazi, the Beacon Hill, Van Dusen.
Yeah, some
Okay.
beautiful flora and fauna
Yeah.
up this way, that's for sure.
I love them, and I in the Portland area, I love the Rose Garden, and there's just so much there.
Mm. Beautiful.
So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks
Any
for
last
sharing.
questions? Okay, well, wonderful. Thanks so much, Jackie. And I'm glad that the people from Abbotsford could join us tonight. And just to remind everybody again that Monday, December 2nd will be our holiday photo exchange at the print share meeting. And I guess we'll say good night.
Good night, and thanks
Okay.
again.
Good night.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Maybe we can reciprocate.
Sometime. Yeah, definitely. We'll
Yeah,
keep in
we'd
touch
Okay,
on
that.
that.
that would be fun. That would be
Yeah.
Love it.
fun.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Bye for
Great.
now.
okay,
Bye-bye.
good night.
Good night.